Hey friends out there, Rob here. Today I've got another great question and answer for you. Today we're going to be talking about the HCX1. It's a video camcorder by Panasonic in E&G style. Came out in 2016 and it was pretty expensive when it came out. We're going to be comparing that, and we got a question from a user today that wants to know how come the RX100 Mark II or Mark 7, that series of cameras, even newer cameras, seem to be so much sharper with less work. We're going to get into that now, so stick around. Friends, I want to let you know before we jump into this, shameless plug, if you like what I'm doing and you want to support the channel, hit the Amazon links and PayPal links down below. Plug over. I got to say, Baca News Network over here on YouTube asked the question. It was a real simple question. He says, hey, I've got an HCX1 and a Sony RX100 Mark 7. How about the sharpness of the picture of the HCX2? My Sony RX100 Mark 7 does very sharp 4K in comparison to my HCX1, and the 4K looks blurry on the HCX1 or a little bit too much grainy. I was unable to get the settings to reach the way that I wanted specific to the RX100 Mark 7 to have a perfect balance and great sharpness with that camera without too much noise from the HCX1. Sharp picture is something I'm looking for. Mine are full and grainy and a little bit soft. I get a kind of blurry picture. This is the question that he's asking about. Why is it blurrier, right? Why is one than the other? And the answer is going to be pretty simple, but let's first look at the camera that we're actually talking about. This is the Panasonic HCX1. It came out in 2016, or it was announced at the end of 2016, really came out in 2017. So we're talking about easily, we're in 2023 right now, the RX100 Mark 7, I believe, came out in 2019. Could have been 2020, so it's already a 3-year-old earlier camera. And the RX100 Mark 7 is a 1-inch style sensor, just like this one is. So why is the RX100, which is ostensibly a zoomable point-and-shoot pocketable camera, much like the size of the Fujifilm Instax Mini Evo? It is not an instant camera, though. I'm just using the size reference. It's small and compact. Actually, it's quite a bit smaller than that, now that I think about it. Why is it that that camera right there makes better video? That's really the question. And the answer comes from two different things. First of all, I do not have a problem with sharpness in my video of the HCX1. I'll get into why that is in a second, but more importantly, there is a sensor difference between the cameras. There's generational differences. So the first reason is that Sony's using a backside illuminated sensor in that camera. I don't necessarily know what type of sensor they're using in this camera. Panasonic keeps pretty close-lipped on that. Sometimes they do use Sony sensors. Most of the time, they're in-house developments. So I don't know if it's backside illuminated, but that is a big change between the going into the 2020s and, of course, 2017s in cameras. Backside illuminated sensors had been in cameras, not camcorders, earlier. So it's just a difference in technology. That technology for the backside illuminated camera, generally speaking, and I'm just speaking in generalities here, showed up in cinema cameras that was much more expensive rather than just the E&G style cameras, which at the time that this was offered, it was $3,500 when it came out, $3,100 to $3,500 depending on what sale. And of course, the RX100 Mark 7 is a $1,200 camera. So there are differences there. So number one is this is an older sensor, which would lead to some artifacting differences in technology that you would find noticeable and appreciable differences. That could result in some of the sharpness that you're asking about. But I think more importantly, the real answer to the question is that the RX100 is set up with very limited user profiles as compared to something like this. So when you go into here, you've got, I think it's a 22 diagram phase control on this camera where you can control the color, the saturation, hue, and vibrance, and actually make select colors change their overall hue. So if you wanted to pinpoint just a particular kind of red, a red within this color saturation and range using a luminance chart, you could adjust just that color, and you could do that in camera. You can do all of that from its knee and heel, from its gamma to its shadows, its darkness, its lights, its brights, everything. So you have quite a bit of control just over, number one, the color. Color is where you're going to see chrominance issues, number one, and chrominance issues turn into noise. So getting your color right for what you're shooting in your situation is going to be helpful. That's many times why I will shoot a very flat profile rather than a very vivid profile, because it gives me more opportunity to adjust colors at the final product. This also shoots 8-bit, so the RX100 Mark 7 shoots 8-bit, so there's no real difference there. We still have just 8 bits of color, which is 16.7 million different colors that we can have. Really, it's only 256 different kinds of color in each color that you have. So there's only 256 basic different shades of that particular set of blue that this camera can make, or red or green. Same with any other 8-bit. That's why 10-bit cameras are such a huge advantage, because a 10-bit camera has 1024 bits in each color channel, which is, of course, 4 times more, and that gives you much more color depth, less likely to see banding, more color pushability. So all of that is to say that that could be one reason that you're experiencing some noisiness and roughness, because this camera is definitely a more professional focused camera, and they expect you to change the color profiles that you're using based on your shooting situation. Generally speaking, I like to shoot in a flat profile. Sometimes I'll use Spark, that's built in, but I always have my color adjustments done to the camera. And I do color match between cameras. So the next question would then be sharpness. Why isn't it as sharp as the Sony RX100m7? Well, again, here we have another issue. I don't believe that the camera is not sharp. This lens on here is an excellent lens. I quite like it quite a bit. And just look at the size of the lens. When you consider that both the RX100 Mark II and this use a 1-inch sensor, and you consider that the RX100 Mark II goes out to roughly 200mm equivalent in 35mm format comparison, like full frame comparison, this goes out to 480mm equivalent in that same comparison. So we're getting 20 times zoom on this camera rather than just, 10, something like that? Maybe 10, maybe 8 times zoom on the RX100. Bigger lens, different elements, more movable elements inside, more spherical elements. So Sony may have some edge when it comes to that particular design for close range. Lenses generally have a different focal range where they're sweet spot, they're the sharpest and things like that. The Sony will also have a wider aperture at most of its focal range, especially when zooming, compared to this camera, which will lead to other reasons that you might feel like that camera is better in low light. But the sharpness will come down to your master tonal compare. But the sharpness will come down to your master detail, your keystone, your pedestaling, and everything else, how you set up the image, and how you wish to have the coring function set out. This camera, the HCX1, has a big brother, which is the exact same camera. It's called the UX180, except the UX180 happens to have the 3G SDI ports right here, which this one does not have. That camera manual, which is the exact same camera minus the 3G SDI ports, that camera manual itself is over 500 pages for the full-length manual in one language, English, right? The Sony RX100 is nothing like that. The difference that they're trying to illustrate here, or that I'm trying to illustrate here, is that this camera requires quite a bit of in-depth knowledge. So you really need to jump into the manual and read the manual, or understand how coring works, skin detail works, understand how phase shifting works specific to the colors, understand master tone, things like that when we get to moving through this camera, and then set it up to taste. And it takes a while. So to answer your question at Baka News Network, no, I don't think that the camera is any less sharp. However, I do see that the camera could have the ability not to produce as clean a video in low light because of the older sensor. But in other senses, I use this camera and enjoy it quite a bit. So there's the answer to that question. I hope it helped you. Don't forget to leave a comment down below. Pick up a cup of coffee or something through an Amazon link. I'd appreciate it. And I'll catch you guys on the flip side. Bye for now.